Hey, everybody out there, this is Danny Bedrosian, the keyboard player for George Clinton Parliament Funkadelic, and you are watching Musicians Reveal with Joe Kelley.
My next guest here on Musicians Reveal is a phenomenally talented keyboardist, author. He's the longest tenured keyboardist in Parliament Funkadelic. Yes, he is. And he's put together a great book, which was released a couple of years ago, maybe 1.5 years ago. It is the authorized P-Funk song reference official canon of Parliament Funkadelic. You find everything you know, who played on what record, when, and clear up a bunch of the misinformation on there. We welcome Danny Bedrosian. How you doing, Danny?
Good, Joe. Thank you so much for having me on the show. It's a real pleasure.
Yeah, I got to ask you the real important question. You grew up in Massachusetts. You're a New Englander, but been down in Florida like 20 plus years. How were your snow removal and driving skills in the snow when it snowed down there?
Well, my driving skills are second to none in Tallahassee, Florida. I'm gonna tell you that much. Snow removal was interesting because they don't have plow, sanding, salting, or any kind of facilities to navigate the cleanup of an actual snowfall. Because I've been here 22 years, I've never experienced any snow here. There was like a dusting maybe 10, 15 years ago. But when I say dusting, I mean it disintegrated before it even hit the ground. This was a bona fide snowfall, and it was definitely unprecedented for Tallahassee. A little scary, but the kids had a ball. They took, because you can't buy a sled in Florida, so the kids got like surfboards and pans from the kitchen and lids to Tupperwares and lids to cases and all kinds of things. And they're going down the hill, the roads, and of course nobody's on the roads because it snowed an inch. It snowed an inch, so nobody is driving. One of my neighbors even said, he's like, "Did you just come back from driving?" I'm like, "Yeah, I went to the store." He's like, "You're not supposed to go out. They said you're not supposed to go out." I was like, "Oh, okay." And the grocery store, everything was closed except Walmart, which is really funny. Like everything was closed. Gas stations were closed. 1 inch of snow. I mean, maybe 2, but I mean, for a northerner, nothing. They canceled school for 3 days.
I read something. This is amazing that you were a fan of Parliament Funkadelic and George Clinton since the age of 11, and you were determined to get in that mix of people, and you did. Tell us at 11, where did you hear P-Funk music for the first time?
Well, I can't pinpoint for certain, but I would probably say sampling. Okay. Although I'm not 100% on that, I probably heard "I Want to Testify" before that, but most likely the first time that I was cognizant of that it was P-Funk was through the heavy sampling of the 80s and 90s. I listened to a lot of hip hop in those years, and just was really interested in the sound. I really liked what I was hearing. I didn't really understand it. I wanted to hear more. It piqued my curiosity. There was an air of mystery to it. All these things. A lot of time when I discover things that are vast and have expansive histories, I tend to do deep dives. And P-Funk was like the ultimate version of that. So I went in hard from that point. I was probably 11 years old when I first heard that stuff. So it was probably like 92.
Okay. So YouTube wasn't a thing back then, and P-Funk on the radio, that's not necessarily a heavy airplay at the time.
Right.
You got it from the sample, and you researched, obviously.
Yeah. And I mean, I will backtrack a little and say that, Boston radio, hip hop radio, and R&B radio did play P-Funk because culturally it was becoming so influential in the 90s. Like, calling it a comeback is even kind of obscuring it in a way, because it was sort of like a brand new explosion of a way of listening to P-Funk. And so with that, people started spinning records like Dog a whole lot more, and like putting them back on the, not just on the R&B stations, but on the more contemporaneous hip hop stations that were playing like the newest hits. So something kind of unheard of at the time for a band that was at the time almost 40 years old at that time, being played on, you know, the most modern hip hop radio. But that sort of showed their cultural influence, you know, and I definitely found out about it from like hip hop samples. It could be anything from Public Enemy to MC Hammer to NWA to Digital Underground to Ice Cube to De La Soul. Like I listened to all of it, and it all had to Arrested Development to En Vogue. I mean, like it all had P-Funk samples, you know.
Yeah.
So,
hey, and Kiss FM was Sonny Joe White, right?
Yeah, Kiss 108. Yeah,
Kiss 108. I remember going into Boston. We went to some nightclub in Boston. Was it Narcissist or something?
Narcissist.
That might be. Well, you're younger than me, so
it might be before my time. It doesn't sound familiar, but because I knew all the clubs when I was growing up. There were a lot of the clubs that were there in the 90s and late 80s were also there in like the 60s and 70s. So a lot of those spots were still around, but you know, some places had closed by the time I was playing, so it might have been gone already. It might still be there, and I just don't remember it. You know.
So you grew up in a family. Your parents both classically trained, and they were professors. Had their own music school, so you got indoctrinated really fast. Was there any resistance to getting into, or you took to it right away to play music?
No, not really any resistance. Well, you know. My parents always get mad when I say in interview that they were strict, because they weren't necessarily strict, but modern parenting today has an air of liberality to it that did not exist in the days of almost any generation before it, you know. So I would say my parents were both educators, you know, so they you know, I think that maybe if I was really goofing off and I really fought against it, they eventually would be like, okay, you're not taking lessons anymore. But it wasn't like that. I may have had a bad year here and there, but for the most part, I was doing it, you know, because they said we were doing it. So I wasn't really fighting against it too hard. I mean, I remember a couple of years where it was a little rough, but, you know, started at about 3 or 4 with the classical training, with the actual lessons, you know, mostly from my father. My mother taught me a couple of years, but my father's probably more strict with me, not necessarily with their students, but he was more strict with me. And so I think that's why he was my teacher. And if it weren't for his discipline, he was one of the most tireless practitioners I've ever seen in my life. His practice regimen, his routine, and the way he practices, I didn't really understand it until I was probably in my 40s, to be honest with you, you know. And then have my mother, perfect pitch, perfect ear, can play anything that anybody, both of them can pretty much do that with playing, but like perfect pitch, fantastic organist as well as pianist, can do all the bass pedals with the feet and all that stuff. And you know, they grew up working in the church. It was another gig for them, you know. They weren't uber religious, but they worked in churches as a choir director, and my mother was the organist a lot of times, accompanist. And so my sisters and I a lot of times were enrolled in the church choirs as well. So in addition to practicing every day and having a lesson every week and doing piano competitions and doing recitals, we also did choir practice once a week and 2 services on Sunday. So that, you know, my wife always jokes me about having a thick regiment. My regular, you know, contemporaneous regiment is pretty thick. And I think I probably liken it to, or can chalk it up to that upbringing, that everything is kind of structured in a way where everything happens the same way every day. And you know, my parents taught a lot of students, so they were teaching kind of all day, you know. So when we got home from school, they were teaching, and we made dinner for them. They took like a 20-minute dinner and then went
Okay.
right back to teaching and taught into kind of late hours, sometimes as late as 9 or 10, or I think kind of often it was 9 and sometimes it was 10. And so they were kind of working all day, you know, and my father tended to keep multiple jobs. He was a construction worker and he built speakers. He worked everywhere. He worked all over. It's like me. He did like 100 jobs, you know,
That's right.
and, but I think in the arts, that's maybe the key, at least in America. I think if we lived in Canada or Finland or somewhere else, that might not be the case. I think we'd all just be musicians doing like one thing. But
Right.
but because we're in America, we are in a multidisciplinary world, which is both great and terrible. It's both wonderful and evil. It teaches us all kinds of life skills that we wouldn't have done had we just been the one thing that we dreamt of being. But it takes an 18-hour workday to do everything you have to do. I mean, if you want to be successful and like kind of continue to be upwardly mobile on a DIY level, on an independent level, you know. Okay, I'm saying a lot. We can go.
No. I'm not going to interrupt you. I'm interested in all of it. So I did have a question, since your siblings and your parents and yourself all played. How many instruments, and did you fight for practice time on particular instrument when you were growing up?
It was all piano and voice. We all sang and we all play piano. As I got older and became like the one in the family of the kids who like went into professional music for real, I started learning other instruments. I played bass for a little while. I played drums. I play hand percussion. I play some other instruments, but in our family, it's piano. And I always kind of make this quip that the Bedrosians is almost like 3 jobs that the Bedrosians do. You're either something with piano, music in general, or a fine artist, or a professional baseball player. Those are the 3 things you do if you're a Bedrosian. So like in my family, my grandfather and my oldest sister, Holly, were both fine artists. My father's cousin, really we called him Uncle Steve, was my father's cousin, Steve Bedrosian. He played Major League Baseball for a long
Played for
time.
the Braves. I remember, relief pitcher
Braves,
for the
the
Braves.
Twins, the Phillies, the Giants. He got a few World Series titles, like 2 wins and 1 loss under his belt, and the Cy Young Award in '89 or '90. And he was all-star player, you know. And then his son Cam, my cousin Cam, his son also played for the Angels for years. So Steve's brother Bobby also played in the minors and was considered for the majors before he had an accident. So they were all a lot of baseball players in the Bedrosian family too. So it's kind of the 3 trades: piano, fine arts, and baseball. Apparently,
That's really interesting. I mean, everybody had their specialty, and you found yours, and you brought back doing all different types of job at once. You at one point were, and probably still are today, working in so many different bands besides Parliament Funkadelic. What was the big band that you started, that you were the leader of the band for many years? Talk about that.
Yeah, when I was in New England, I guess in '98, 17, I'd already been in a billion bands because I probably started playing shows 13 or 14 years old, you know, and so I was getting snuck into clubs that I was too young to be in, playing in metal bands and hip hop groups and R&B groups and Latin groups, all kinds of genres, punk bands and anything I could get into. And I was kind of the sole keyboard player in the area. There were tons of guitarists and drummers and bass players and singers and even horn players and everything, but there was not a lot of keyboard players my age. So I was kind of sought after and played in a lot of bands from a really young age. I was playing in multiple bands in all genres, you know, and mostly stuff I didn't care for. And then I got bit by the P-Funk bug, and a few years after that started forming funk bands. And then the most successful one I started in '98 called Sweet Mother Child. And it started out as a 4-piece, but it grew very fast. And by our 3rd or 4th year, we'd swelled up to about 18 people. Put out 6 albums, toured as much as kids in high school and college can tour. We actually, we worked every weekend. played a ton of clubs, a ton of festivals. We went as far as New York City and Long Island and all over New England. And we're actually pretty successful for a bunch of 17 to 22-year-olds, you know,
Yeah.
and you know, it was through that music really that George and the band first heard my playing or my singing or anything, was through the Sweet Mother Child albums, you know, and I brought a bunch of ADATs down with me when I did my first sessions with George. You know, it was the days of the ADATs. But when I
Okay.
first started in the studio, it was still analog days when I first started
Okay.
recording. I just mean in studios in Boston and surrounding areas. And then very quickly switched from tape to ADAT. And I was in
Mhm.
that ADAT world for 6-7 years before the digital revolution. And the digital revolution kind of coincided with me moving to Florida after graduating from UNH. And after I didn't disband Sweet Mother Child, I left the leadership up to 2 founding members who were
Okay.
still in the group. But it only stayed together after that for about a year. However, it's interesting that you bring it up because we're actually working, like, we all stayed friends forever, and we've sort of reconvened in a way, and we're completing our first album in over 20 years, our 7th album, and it's going to be out in May, and we're going to do some
Oh, wow.
dates up in the
Wow.
Northeast to sort of celebrate the album, and so it's gonna be fun.
So most of the members still signed on for it?
Yeah, so far I got about 9 of them, and I'm on my way to 16. I got like a bunch that are signed on but haven't done their parts yet, so we're just trying to get
Okay.
everybody. Some people are still in the business, some people only play for fun still, some people barely play at all. I'm kind of like brushing up to try to get on the thing, so it's been really fun.
How about you mentioned the first recording session with George? Where was it, and what were you working on at the time?
um well to back up, you know, I was a big fan, and I would go front row to all the shows I could and drop off demos and albums I did and things like that. And one year I had actually won this contest that was put together by the One Nation boardroom,
Oh yeah, I remember that.
where
Yeah.
you make the bed sheet that George wears at the show. And I won the chance to give him the bed sheet I made in Providence, Rhode Island at Lupo's.
Wow.
And I was 17 or 16 or 17. And again, you know, art kind of runs in the family. I got a little art streak. I don't draw as well as my sister, but I can draw. And so I did like this kind of ornate aliens and spaceships and all the imagery, but it had all kinds of lyrics from different songs. It had Rump of Steel Skin from the Motor Booty Affair album on the front, and the One Nation Under a Groove flag on the back. And it was really kind of, I mean, pretty good for a young kid. And it won the contest. They loved it. George wore it at the show. And so I took every opportunity at that show to drop off my music to sing. I sang a cappella for George and Tracy and a few other people. I just did whatever I could do to show them that I knew my stuff, because up until that point I'd already been like really studying P-Funk. You know, as a
Mhm.
classical musician, I never wanted to be the guy in classical music or in jazz that's like the snobby, I'm not going to apply this brilliant learning strategy to another genre just because it's not what you consider to be high art or whatever. I was never that guy. So I used every stratagem that I had been given as a classical pianist to learn this music as much as possible. And in being already trained to become a concert recitalist, and I mentioned this a few times before,
Mhm.
in being trained in that, you have to learn feel really, really deeply. And P-Funk music is so feel based that you can know the parts all you want. You can be well versed in the music and never be able to play it right if you don't have the feel. And I think I lucked out in my natural feel that I had a little bit of something that I could grow with once I'd gotten into the band. But my first opportunity to work with them after the contest was they invited me down to Monticello, Florida to do some recording at their studio there at the time. They had not yet moved the studio to Tallahassee. Monticello is kind of a country town to the east of Tallahassee. I wouldn't call it a suburb. very, very rural. You know, it's very rural. It's almost like antebellum, you know? And they were, ironically or coincidentally, whatever, they were there. That's where they were staying. And I went down there for spring break. By this point, I was 19 and got my first chance to record with them. At that point, they were finishing the still unreleased, well, never released, I should say, Funkadelic album that was supposed to come out in '99. It was called The Last Time Zone. And the deal got nixed because the record company got bought by Disney. Even back then, things were happening like that. You know, we don't think about Disney in those days in those terms, but they were like that in '99 too. You know, buying up companies and just kind of shelling them and scrapping them and whatever. And so the album never saw the light of day, but that's what they were working on, and I was working on, you know, things that would have either been on the album or maybe outtakes. You know, a lot of times you can work in the studio for years and not have anything that you do make it onto an album, because most of the people that worked in George's studio at any given time were hoping that whatever they'd been recording, they could have recorded hundreds of songs for him. You know, they're hoping that whatever they recorded in those times eventually makes it on wax, so to speak. And you know, and that they can be sort of immortalized in that way. But that was, you know, the trajectory that I was going towards at that time, you know, becoming a studio guy for George. But, you know, my real dream was to be one of his keyboard players on the road. You know, that's what I really wanted. And I had already been studying with a few of the guys in the band, Jerome Rogers, Tracy Lewis, and working with several of the studio guys and working with Steve Boyd and other people before I was even in the band. So that gave me a little extra push for me to, you know, those guys spoke up for me, and George's like, well, if there's a job that comes up, we'll get something for you, you know. But you know, he knew I was still in college, so he's like, stay in school, finish college. He knew I was paying my own way. He was like, finish college first, don't. And I had a lot of opportunities to do other things along the way. You know, I worked in restaurants. You know, I got like a few offers for these, like, you know, 6-figure kind of restaurant manager type of jobs that I could have taken, and had worked as a cook for over a decade by that point. Also, I had gotten the offer to be the organist for Bo Diddley at this point, and and turned it down because I was still in college, and they were wanting me to just jump ship and go do it. You know, a lot of people would. Your average musician, or not even your average great musician would even do it because they know an opportunity when they see one. But for me, I had a path. I knew what that path was. My favorite band was P-Funk. I wasn't going to let anything else get in the way, even a good opportunity. I mean, if you play What If, and if I had joined Bo Diddley's band back in 2000, and he sadly passed, massive loss to the culture, massive loss to American music as we know it. He passed not super long after that. I mean, it was less than a decade after that, I think. And so my life would have been totally different. I would have missed the opportunity to be in my favorite band. I might still be in the business, but doing what, I don't know, you know? So I think I made the right decision in waiting and finished school. And upon doing so, I moved to Tallahassee, Florida, a place I knew nothing about, to start working in his studio. And it just so happened that the touring group had gotten rid of or had lost their last keyboard tech. So I had gotten the job to get to do keyboard teching. Now, I'd already done it a bunch for them when I was still in college. So they'd actually hired me to do it a bunch when I was still in school, just whenever they were in the Northeast. And then upon moving down, I was probably in Tallahassee 3 months before I got the gig. But even my first gig, my very first gig, there were no other keyboard players that could make it. So I had to play keys. Oh, no, I think it was me and one other, but they needed me to play because one of the other keyboard players couldn't make it. So I played my very first gig. I was supposed to be teching, but I played the whole show.
Where was this at?
It was actually in Tallahassee. It was September of 2003. And then my first jobs with George and them doing multiple shows, like traveling, was at the end of December of that same year. And in Miami and Orlando. And then my first full-on 30-day tour was in February, coming right after that. So, but from the very beginning, they had the keyboard players, the guys in the, Bernie Worrell, Jerome Rogers, Joel Johnson. They had me playing. They wanted me to play. And then it wasn't long before Blackbird McKnight and Gary Scheider, Billy Bass Nelson, Cordell Boogie Mawson, and Lige Curry, and all these guys, Benny Cowan and Greg Thomas. My uncles, my big brothers, really not even my uncles, my big brothers, kind of leaned in and like pulled me in, and were like, this guy can actually play or whatever, that's how like Blackbird always used to tell it, and Lige, and Clip Payne and all those guys. And I studied with them quite rigorously, and including, of course, Mr. Bernie Worrell, who I did like 3 really rigorous years of training with. But studied with all of them, Gary Scheider, Mike Hampton, learned so much and just continued my training, as a keyboard tech / keyboard player in the band. But I was basically in the band from the beginning thanks to the guys. It was the older guys in the band who had taken me in a way that they almost didn't take in any of the other younger guys. So I was really honored. But they knew this was my favorite music and that I'd studied already. I'd already done a decade of study or more of P-Funk before I'd gotten in the band, whereas some people come in and all they know is whatever's on the radio, even people who come into the band. But I knew that it deserved a canonical look, a canonical study for this keyboard chair. The keyboard chair, because of Bernie Worrell, he did not make it an easy job to fill, so he definitely set the bar very high. And I'm proud to have not only met with his approval, as well as a lot of the other original guys and George, but also managed to have the longevity that I've had, because that's one of the hardest things to do in a band like this, is have longevity, especially if you're not from the core group that came in, like, the more sort of enunciated decades of P-Funk's history, 70s, 60s, mostly 70s. Most people who joined in those other decades don't last for whatever reason. And so I got an unbroken 22-year tenure, I'm proud to say. So that's, I'm proud of that.
You're the quarterback behind there, with your keyboards and everything. And George, obviously, how does he call you? I mean, he's in his early 80s. Does he call you up for, let's jam on something, record something, as much as he did back then?
Yeah, maybe more in a way, because we live so close together. Like we're in the same neighborhood, so I could walk to his house if I had to. And so, yeah, he comes over here. We do a podcast called a Bump by Bump Rundown.
Yeah, I've seen that. Those are really cool. Yeah.
Thanks. And so we do them right here in my studio. And a lot of times we'll talk about all the stuff we're working on. We work quite a bit, not just in Parliament Funkadelic, but I do production and music director jobs for his art shows. And then he joins me as a special guest on my book shows. So, which we're having many, many more of in this coming year. There's a lot of stuff coming up that George and I are doing, along with a few sort of key members of P-Funk, of the rhythm section that are joining us for those. So yeah, we get together quite a bit. And yeah, he has me record and stuff. Sometimes I'll do it here at the studio. Sometimes we'll go down to his studio. But we both are closer to my studio, so a lot of times we might just do it here these days, just closer to his house, and I'll come pick him up and just do that. But yeah, no, he's still.
Does he take you out fishing?
I've never gone fishing. It's not because he hasn't asked me. I just have never gone. And I've gone. I've gone on like the trips where the fishing trips happened. I just didn't go in the boat and go fishing with them. But yeah, no, I've never been fishing. I guess I'm too urbane. I don't know what it is. I guess I'd like to someday. I'm not counting it out. But a lot of times, and it sounds funny, it sounds silly, but a lot of times I've just been too busy to do anything I mean, I haven't even been on a vacation in, see, when was my last daughter born? I haven't been on a vacation since at least 2021 or 2022 with the latest, so I haven't, just been working, just stay working.
And you nearly had a near-death experience with COVID, the alpha COVID, right?
Yeah. COVID was a mess for me. It was, it was a rough time. I'm really blessed because right before that time, I had decided to quit drinking, start eating right,
Right.
and start running, which I hadn't done in like a decade or two, and started a daily running regimen, which I continue to this day. And if I wasn't doing that, the COVID would have easily been severe enough for me to die quite easily. Because if I was in the shape I was in before that, yeah, definitely, I definitely wouldn't have made it. Because I mean, I lost and I gained some of it back since then because I lost an ungodly amount of weight. I think I lost like 85 pounds or something crazy.
That's like losing
And
a kid.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
insane. And but it set me in the right zone because I was exercising and eating nothing but vegetables and just I was going in, and like not overeating, not eating late, not drinking anymore, keep just being better,
Right.
And wow, that paid off because I wasn't expecting, none of us were expecting something like that to come around the corner.
Yeah.
But I was lucky that it did when it did.
Mhm.
Although, yeah, the suffering was awful. And then I have some bouts with like a version of long COVID that comes back, where it's like I can still feel it in my lungs and in my chest, and they've done a million. There's nothing. You're good. Like it's not, your lungs are great, your chest looks great, but I've had some pulmonary things that have come as a result of like the long COVID. And but I just stay running. My pulmonary doctor says it's a good idea. I just stay exerting myself because I don't know. It feels good. It feels right. So
Yeah.
I try to keep up.
Hey, you're looking good. You got all the energy, and you're going strong. So
Thank
you
you.
made the right decisions.
Thanks.
Yeah. Hey, let's talk about the book because it's crucial for our music fans and P-Funk fans, of course, but people who are just into great funk music and the legacy of Parliament Funkadelic. The book that I wanted to, I'm friends with Dwayne Tudall, who is the author and historian for Prince's Paisley Park estate. And he's put out
Yeah.
two books for Prince's recordings, The Purple Rain and also Sign of the Times Era. And one of the things he was able to do is because Prince's recording studio logs he used at Sunset Sound and everything. But he says when Prince had his own studio and things weren't documented so much, the future books are going to be tough. And I thought of you when we were going to talk. I said, man, you must have had a really tough task piecing this all together. I mean, it's your love, but how did you, first of all, the idea, and then talk about the process of putting it together?
Yeah, it started out as just piles of notebooks as a student in school. Wasn't in P-Funk yet. I was in probably as early as 7th grade, writing in notebooks like these really obscure lists, very esoteric lists of like, these are all the songs this person sang on in the whole canon, and these are all the songs they sang on for Parliament, and these are all the songs they sang on for the Brides of Funkenstein, or whatever. Like super specific personnel listings that I was like getting into because I was really into who played and sang on what records. So many people involved, and you want to kind of know who all these people are as you're listening to it, And I tried to pride myself on learning that information as much as possible against all kinds of odds in the 90s where the early internet and there was all kinds of stuff published that was inaccurate or halfway accurate. So for a number of reasons I started keeping my own logs. Some of the other reasons are because maybe some liner notes are a little less than complete. Sometimes they'll say all the people who played bass on the album, but you might not know who's on each song. Or sometimes people are listed that didn't even play on the album. And a lot of times there are people who aren't listed who did.
Right.
So I wanted to just keep it for me. It was just for me, for my own study, you know, and I thought that it would benefit me in my goals getting into P-Funk, you know, into getting into this band. It wasn't until COVID that I said, oh, this could be a book. I could make a book out of it, you know? And I don't, and it's funny because nobody put like the little birdie in my ear or whatever. Nobody said, because this stuff was just stuff I kept at the top of a closet and occasionally looked at and maybe changed something. And when it came time to actually type or write this actual book, that stuff, you know, that was just secondary source material. I didn't even really use it or like take it out to look at it because it already been sort of entrenched in my mind, or that was like the first step of documenting this stuff. The second and much more important step was primary source interviews with the important people that were involved on the records. And
yeah,
you know,
and I like in the book you have a really detailed how long the interview was for with all the people. That's really cool.
Thank you. Yeah, well, because you know, I know everybody involved, even the guys who, you know, aren't in this band. I've said this a lot of times. This band almost works like a 5-piece band where like everybody really is really tight. You could have another person and me, and we could have no live analog together. Or in fact, we could be separated by 20, 40 years of inactive tenure from one another and still be thick as thieves, you know, hang out, might call each other, hang out, you know, it's really funny. And this is pretty true mostly across the board. There's obvious cliques, there's obvious groups that mingle with certain ones more than others, but you're talking about 140 something contributors, or more or less, give or take. And so I wanted to get as many interviews with as many of the still living people as I could, because, you know, if I could have written this 10 years before, I would have or should have. You know, if COVID had happened 10 years before, it probably would have come out then. But COVID did give me the opportunity to have 5 to 9 extra hours a day to write this book, because not only was I spending a lot of hours doing that, everything went up. My practice regimen shot up to like 6 or more hours a day of playing. I can't do that these days now that the world is back open, but I still do, you know, 4 or 5. But you know, I was going in, you know, on the practicing my classical and doing everything that I never had the chance to do because we were on tour or we were just working too much. So the book was a big part of that, and COVID was the only reason that happened. So it's a blessing in disguise for sure. Got to interview like 50 or so of the guys and ladies from the history of this thing, going all the way back to the beginning. It's got original member. Go ahead.
Of all the interviews, who had the best memory of all the sessions? Anybody come to mind?
George Clinton. George Clinton.
Okay.
By far. I mean, like, it's sickening, kind of, like, because he'd forget something, and like he'd be like, and this would be the first thing he'd forget, and we'd be doing, you know, hours, and he'd be like, I remember the last name, and it's somebody that did one session only in the whole history of the band. And he's like, I remember the last name. And then like the next day he called me and said, I remember the first name. It's this. And that'd be somebody who's only on one song. Like,
wow.
You know, it's really crazy. It's really crazy.
Did he mention anything specifically about the track with Prince, Paradigm?
I mean, you know, we've talked about Paradigm. You know, I know that you know, he and Prince did. It was initially going to be on The Last Time Zone, which was the Funkadelic album from '99. It was initially supposed to be on that album, and then it ended up on How Late Do You Have to Be Before You're Absent, which was a 2005 kind of compilation album of stuff that had not yet come out from like the previous 10 years. And that song is pretty much all him and Prince. I mean, Prince did all the instrumentation, and he and Prince did all the vocals. And it's in the book. It's in the book.
And Prince, I read something, I don't know Is this true? Prince was over your shoulder through a whole gig watching you play?
Yeah,
Is that true?
yeah,
Where
yeah,
was this?
yeah. That was at Music Midtown in Atlanta in
Okay.
2004.
Oh, okay.
Four or five, four, I think. Yeah, and yeah, he was right over my shoulder for. It might have been 2005. It was either 4 or 5, but yeah, he was right over my shoulder for the whole gig. There's been a few times like that where like, and then after a while, people just won't tell me, and then they'll be like, "Yeah, Herbie Hancock was watching you the whole time. He was right behind you." He was right behind me. Why didn't you tell me? I wanted to, But
You
yeah,
could have
those things
played
happen a
together.
lot.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
So I,
exactly.
I I cut into your talk about the book as far as the interviews and piecing it together. And you didn't have ChatGPT and AI to help you write a book. You had to just
No, no,
use
I
your
would never
mind. Yeah.
use that anyway. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. I mean, I went to school for I was a history major in school, Middle Eastern studies. I
Okay.
wrote, I wrote like 100-page colloquium just to get my historian status. So and everything had to do with legitimation and primary sources. I say those two things over and over again. Um, and as an historian, a degree holding historian, I knew that this was like kind of the job for me. I had all the right combinations of being in the band, but also being its biggest fan, of having access to the archives, but also having had access to many of the guys that are sadly passed, that I spent hours and years and days and weeks and months asking them all the tedious questions, as well as access to the new primary source interviews with all my brothers and sisters in the band who were willing to take them and give me hours of their time in a lot of cases. Pouring over the minutia of this discography. So yeah, that stuff was super beneficial. And then upon finishing it, the biggest sort of obstacle in my way was not so much writing, because like I said, being a history major, I can write. I've written lots of stuff, but it was publishing. So I sought out publishers for, I don't know, 2 years probably.
Wow.
And good friend of mine who's in the entertainment industry let me work with his manager, who got him his first book deal. And she taught me all kinds of good stuff. The most important thing she taught me was how to write a book proposal. And
Okay.
that was the thing. Although we disagreed on a lot of other stuff with regards to the book,
Okay.
she wanted it to be in 2 volumes. She wanted it to be alphabetical, and I fought against both those ideas really hard, because I thought the epic grandeur of the nature of this canon, it deserved one big tome. And alphabetical, it's already a reference book, so the alphabetical thing, it just makes it so cold. I don't want it to be a cold, like strictly academic read. I want it to be the kind of thing that it's reference, but you can go in a chronological line, because I think it's important for people to see 70 years of unbroken work. And more
Right.
importantly than 70 years, 8 decades, 8 separate decades
Right.
of work for one group, one man too, running it all, and living through all that. So it's really a mighty thing, unprecedented, so unprecedented. So I kind of fought against those ideas, and so I sought other help. I decided to go alone without a manager, without an agent, which a lot of people are like, that's crazy. But I thought that my clout in the music industry and my ability to hustle and not take no for an answer would help. And it did. In a lot of ways, the thing that's funny is it always ends up being like who you know and like who you just happen to talk to. I was doing an interview promoting a whole different project, and I was
Right.
still working on the book. The book was still kind of a secret, and I was still seeking publishing, but I was talking about it a little bit here and there in interviews. And the DJ, the interviewer, Christopher from this show Funkatopia, he said, do you know Dwayne Tudor? And
There you go.
and I
Yeah.
said, well, I've heard the name. He's a writer, right? And they said, well, we're going to hook you up with him, and we'll hook you. So they really got me in the door with Dwayne, and Dwayne gave me a lot of great advice. He had me check out this publisher's atlas that you can buy that has all the published. So then I went in deep and like sent in inquiries to hundreds, if not thousands, of publishers that do work that's in my field, my subject, if you will. And no luck. I mean, a lot of interest, but it never got past like second base with a lot of these publishers. And some of them were like, we like it, but it's too academic. Some of them were like, we like it, but it's not quite academic enough. It was like right in between. And then Dwayne was like, well, I wrote these Prince books. They're very similar in tone to what you did, and that Mr. Christopher had hipped me to that as well. He's like, Dwayne Tudor wrote books that are very similar to what you're talking about, but for the Prince discography. And so he was like, maybe my publisher, Roman and Littlefield, they'd probably be interested. And so he put me in touch with Michael Tan, who's now my acquisitions editor at Roman and Littlefield, and works with me, step by step in, all the things that go to getting the book done. But, had the manuscript for him, and they loved it. And they accepted it, and I was just so happy. So thank you, Dwayne Tudor. Thank you, Christopher, and the guys at Funkatopia for that, because it was just kind of a step-by-step, person-by-person. And I'm happy to say that upon release of the book in September of 23, it became their bestseller that year, which is really saying something, because that's only less than 3 months to play with, to be the bestseller for Roman and Littlefield of the whole year.
Yeah,
and has since then made it into the top, I don't know, top 5 or 10 of all time for the publisher. So super happy about that, and super excited because it won an ARSC award just recently, the Association for Recorded Sound Collections, and it won for best discography of the year in the genre. And it was up against some serious books. It was up against Sly's autobiography. It was up against a lot of serious contenders, and so I was super proud to have won that. And so yeah, it's been very successful. And they were the publishers over at Roman and Littlefield, now Bloomsbury, who they've been bought out by, so it's an even bigger publisher now, which is great. And they have basically greenlit they greenlit the second book a while ago, and the second book should be coming out, I think, in October. So that's really exciting.
What kind of book? Could you tip your hand?
It's a kitten calendar.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm just kidding.
I looked at you in the monitor. I was seeing you when you broke your smile or something.
It's another book about P-Funk, and they've basically given me the free rein to create a theme for a series of what will probably be a series of books. The initial meeting was about a mothership book, and I kind of didn't want to do a mothership book, but I counter offered them, well, how about a book about 1975? And they said, okay, what are you thinking? I said, well, Parliament Funkadelic, they put out 3 albums that year: Chocolate City, Let's Take It to the Stage, which just so happens to be my favorite album of all time, P-Funk or not, and Mothership Connection. And in that 8 months, they went from being underground darlings riding around in station wagons in the Chitlin circuit to landing spaceships in sold out arenas and stadiums, around the country. So I said that'd be a great paradigm shift to cover in a book. And it not only touches on the P-Funk history, but it talks about everything that happened in 1975 around the world as well. It gives a nice synopsis of P-Funk history up to that point and all the things that made 1975 happen the way it did. And it gives a good history of all the charting success after 1975 as a result of the platinum success of the Mothership Connection. And it has more brand new interviews, including with people who didn't even do the first book, like Fred Wesley, Reggie McBride, Dina Perlman, all kinds of people who are involved and intricate and integral to the story of what made 1975 for P-Funk. and it's a really exciting project. And it's funny that the first book took me 30 years to write, and then the second book took me a year. But it's a smaller read. It's like just under 300 pages, I believe the manuscript was. If you compare that to the authorized P-Funk song reference, the original manuscript, before they put it into a columnized form and sort of adjusted the book size, the size of the page and the print to make it fit on fewer pages, the initial manuscript, I believe, was somewhere around 1,600 pages. So massive. In the doc, you know, that's how many pages it was. So this is obviously a shorter read. It's much more of a read. You know what I mean? I'd like to meet somebody who read the authorized P-Funk song reference front to back. That'd be interesting. Because this book is more something you could actually read, you know, and because there's a real narrative there, and a really amazing story, again, as told by the people who were there. That's the best part. You got all these primary source, brand new interviews with George. He says stuff in these interviews I've never heard him say, and so that's really exciting. Talking about like influences and who was in the sessions, and this really gets down to the nitty gritty. The kind of cool thing about this is, for the most part, the authorized P-Funk song reference had great reviews, but I tried to keep track of any of the less than great reviews and see what they said. And the only ones that weren't great, and there was like 3 or 4 across like all the different sort of book sites and author sites and things. And one of them was about there wasn't enough stories about in the studio. Now, granted, this book isn't about studio stories, and I kind of say that in the intro, but the new book has a lot of stuff about in the sessions, how it went, what they were doing from those guys like Michael Hampton and Reggie McBride and Mudbone Cooper and Archie Ivy and George and Fred Wesley. So many great interviews. And so it touches on that stuff. It also touches on some corrections in the discographical stuff, even from the authorized P-Funk song reference, with reference to those 3 albums. It has a samples list, which was mentioned in a prior review. So I listed all the samples across those 3 albums, and I did charting numbers, which I didn't include in all of the authorized song reference for space sake. So this now has information on all the singles and what their charting positions were across all charts. So it has that, including songs that weren't in 1975. It gives a pretty good historical look at the charting information. So I kind of included stuff that some people wanted to see in the first book, but maybe didn't because that first book wasn't about that. But now I'm including a lot of that kind of pertinent stuff in these new books. And when I say books, because I have a feeling there's going to be another one after this, and maybe another after that. So
the best place to get the current tome is through Amazon. Would you refer people?
Yeah, you could do Amazon. You could do Roman and Littlefield's website or Bloomsbury's website. You can go on there. You can even just look up the authorized P-Funk song reference on Google and see who's carrying it, because a lot of times they have sold out in certain print runs and have had to be restocked. If you live internationally, there are several book importers or exporters, I should say, that are a lot better than maybe some of the international Amazons. But Amazon is a good one to get it from too. Also, like Barnes and Noble online or Books A Million, all of those, everywhere that books are sold basically digitally. And I always recommend people to recommend it for your local library. It's been put in a number of libraries. It's been put in a number of university libraries as well, that I'm very proud to say. And also recommend it for your local bookseller as well, because chances are they already have it. It's just not in the brick and mortar. So you can recommend it for your brick and mortar as well.
Yeah, that's spectacular that you're working on another book, and this book, when we're long gone, they're going to be looking at this and saying, yeah, Danny Bedrosian really nailed the history of it. So yeah.
Thank you. Well, my first idea for a second book was a second edition, of
Okay.
the first book, but they're making me wait a few years, and I think that's a combination of the fact that it's probably selling pretty well, and because editions of reference books, they usually, I think there's kind of like a gestation period. So,
Right.
but I've already written 75 more pages of material for the second
Wow.
edition. Yeah. So
I got to ask you a music question with the group and everything. I always had wondered as far as who's making decisions or when you guys are changing tempos of a recorded song. Like one of my all-time favorite songs is Not Just Knee Deep, but live you played a little slower, right? On a lot of gigs.
yeah, it depends on the gig, but yeah, for the most part, yeah.
How do you guys come to a feel like that? Who's saying that? Okay, let's take it down a little bit.
That's all George. That's all
Okay.
George.
Okay.
Yeah, and it has been for some time. With reference to those songs, a good understanding of how George works on stage is a nice indicator of what is happening at any given time. So he is a producer's producer, and he's producing during the show. So he has us watching him keenly because he's going to change tempos. It might be he wanted faster sometimes, and Knee Deep is one of those ones where depending on what era it is and who's playing drums can make a difference with the tempo too. So the drummer that's playing at any given time can dictate the tempo in a way, but George is going to constantly monitor them constantly, and he will change tempos even mid song. It goes with that production thing, like, and also with funk. I mean, that's just a thing that a lot of players who just learn how to play funk or haven't played funk for a long time don't realize that, like, that slight change in tempo in the groove, there is a mastery to that. Like, if you can really master pocket where you're pulling back, but the listener doesn't really know it, they just know that it feels so nasty. It's like, ooh, that's nasty. But they're actually like pulling it back in real time. There is an art to that, Now, I'm not saying that what he's always doing is that, but I will say that what the players are doing feel wise most of the time when it's done right is that. And if he is trying to pull us back on something, it is to do that, because he is a real master of how he wants his feel to be, so yeah, a lot of times it'll be for that reason, or sometimes it'll have to do with the venue. And George comes from that stadium culture where if we're playing in a bigger venue, he might actually slow it down on purpose because it's going to like hit the back of the wall and come back in less time. And like I've seen him do it festival after festival in these big, like 500,000 people festivals, overseas and stuff. And he'll bring it back because he's thinking about it hitting that wall. And he said it so many times. I was like, oh, okay. There's a few different reasons why the tempo might be changed, but it's all pretty much the big guy. He still very much dictates how things are going to be going. And like I said, he is a live producer. He is producing live. He does the same thing in the cue mic in the studio, or if you're in the room with him, he'll just sit next to you and just say it to you. He does the exact same thing on stage. He's very much producing in the element. Yeah.
And he's got a hell of a whistle.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
And
How does he pull that off?
It's crazy. And he still has a lot of his falsetto intact. I mean, even though like his mid-range and low range has gotten a lot gruffer, his because when he started, he was the first tenor, he's the first tenor in the Parliaments. Right. He wasn't, people like I've seen people on YouTube and stuff, and there's a song Heart Trouble, classic Parliaments from Golden World Records. And it's, one of the early George, it's George singing lead, it's the Parliaments. And all these people were like, that's not George Clinton. George never sang like that. I'm like, actually, that is George Clinton. George always sang like that. Right. If you listen to the records, he was a lot of the falsetto was him. And, even Bernie Worrell said, and Bernie, who had perfect pitch, used to say, because people don't think of George as like a singer, and he probably maybe isn't or whatever, even in his own eyes. But Bernie even said, and Bernie, who's like very much a musician's musician, he said, George had the most perfect falsetto when he was a kid. He used to say it to me. He's like, "Oh, his falsetto was insane." And if you listen to those records, a good one to listen to is a song called "You Make Me Want to Cry." You ever heard it?
Yeah, I've got that box set that came out a while ago. I don't know if that was on it.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
If it's on there, it's a really good example. I mean, you can find it on YouTube or whatever. It's a really good example of George's falsetto in the 50s. And then to hear his falsetto in the 60s, because the 50s falsetto was crazoid, like early doo-wop falsetto, doing those super high, like coasters type stuff. And then his falsetto in the 60s was a little more refined, Smokey Robinson, Eddie Kendricks influence type stuff. That's like A New Day Begins is a good example of that by the Parliaments. That Was My Girl by the Parliaments is another good example of his falsetto, just a gorgeous falsetto. And he still has that range. Like he can still go, like I try to pride myself on my little first tenor, but he can still go like an octave above me. Like it's insane how high he can go.
Yeah, if our viewers or listeners want to check out Danny Bedrosian's clips that you put out, practicing singing, playing all sorts of classical and all kinds of music, you got a hell of a range. I mean, you're hitting the falsetto, you're hitting kind of, I don't know, is it operatic voice? Do you work in?
Yeah, well, I don't know. A lot of people call me contralto because I can do everything from like sort of contra up to alto. Like, I don't know if that's the correct terminology. I sang in choirs forever, and my father always made me do, all right, you need to be, there's not enough baritones today. Okay, you got to be with the tenors. Oh, there's not enough ladies. You need to sing the alto part or even a soprano part when I was real little. Or, okay, there's only one bass singer. You got to get in the bass. It's just whatever. And a lot of people who grew up in singing groups or with singing, a lot of singing, it's just kind of like, you can give me any part. I'm not in anything. Give me whatever you need. I'll do it, And I think there's, that sort of camaraderie goes with the whole singing thing. George and Gary Scheider and all them were very much entrenched in that world of the singing group. And so, I try to pride myself on singing as much as I can, and I sing lead in my group in Secret Army, and I sing lead on some stuff with P-Funk, so it's fun.
You know who you mentioned vocalists who I really miss being in the group. She rest in peace, Belita Woods.
Yeah.
She was so nice to us when we saw you at Toad's Place in New Haven a couple times. We went backstage. Gary, you were probably back there as well, but Gary and Belita Woods and Belita. There was a gig at the Mohegan Sun's Wolf Den. I don't know if you remember this, but for whatever reason, there was like some technical problems with some of the instruments, whatever. That night she was special that night on vocals. Something was clicking really good for her. Yeah.
Huh.
But, but you've seen so many shows. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I loved Belita. I worked with her a lot, and Gary, on other projects as well, and yeah, we worked together quite a bit, and I loved playing behind those singers, and they always liked my comping skills, so that was really cool. But working with a lot of different singers helps you with your coloring and with, different chordal ideas and finding phrases that match what they're singing, and playing behind a soloist and that kind of stuff. I always got off on that stuff, as well as sort of doing my own thing.
All right. Before we wrap up, Danny, I got to ask you, since right behind you, you've got some of your keyboards set up. What are you bringing on stage with the P-Funk gigs? I mean, you got like five keyboards or so?
Yeah, 5. Yeah. I've got a Roland RD 2000, which I actually have right down here. That's my like weighted 88 key keyboard. I use that for like all my piano stuff, Rhodes, but I also use it for stuff like the strings and for like the poly synths on like Atomic Dog and things like that. I have the Nord Electro. That is can you see that? It's kind of low. It's over here. And then that's like my clavinet and my organ stuff. And then I have this amazing keyboard right here, the ARP Pro Soloist, which is the synthesizer that Bernie did all those leads on. I'm just going to play you a touch so you know this. So classic,
Wow.
such a classic,
Hey, thanks
such a
to do that
classic
for me.
sound. Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
then up here I got the Novation Base Station 2, which is what I use on Flashlight now. It's just
Oh,
like the
okay.
synth bass, so that's got like that low end thing, and then I also have a Moog Voyager. So is that 5 or is that 6? It's either 5 or 6. So
Yeah. You're well equipped, and you're a phenomenal musician. So,
oh, thank
are
you,
you the
thank
only
you, bro.
keyboardist right now with P-Funk?
Yeah, yeah. When I
Yeah.
joined, there were 4 of us, and
Right.
then there were 3 of us, and then there were 2 of us, and then it was
Right.
just me. And even though I've played with all the great, there's been a lot of great keyboard players in this band. I already named a few of them, but also Amp Fiddler and
Yeah.
David Lee Chong, and so many greats that have come, and many of them unfortunately have gone. And but probably the largest tenure portion of my tenure, it was just me, even though there were very important sections where it was me and one other guy, or me and 2 other guys, and me and 3 other guys. But most of my tenure was just me. And what's really crazy too is, not to be too macabre, but like, you think about like who we've lost, okay, across all the different instruments, like how many drummers have passed or how many whatever. Unfortunately, across the instruments, the keyboard player for P-Funk is now the most endangered species in the P-Funk band, because while there's still like 10 guitar players from the group that are still alive, and 10 drummers that are still alive, or 8 bass players, or whatever, you name them, there's only 4 of us left from the keyboard chair that are alive.
Wow.
And that's crazy, because there have been a lot of keyboard players in this band. And so the only ones still with us are myself, Jerome Rogers,
Okay.
David Lee Chong, and Gary Hudge. So there's only 4 of us that are still around that have held that chair. So it's actually the rarest position. If somebody needs P-Funk keyboard players, there's only 4 guys they can call now. Which is kind of crazy. Because
Well,
across all the other instruments, there's still a lot of people out
yeah.
there. There's still a lot of people around, but with the keyboards, we lost a lot of them in like the past decade. So it's just kind of like, it's like the samurai, Joe. It's like the final purveyors of the art.
Yeah. I remember the last time I talked to Bernie when he had the Bernie Worrell Orchestra, and
Yeah.
he was always telling me about his arthritis in his fingers and hands. And do you suffer from any of that?
Knock on wood, no, not yet. I
Okay,
mean, I
that's
have
good.
had injuries or whatever. I've had hairline fractures on a finger on this hand. I had wrist injections on this hand when I had a wrist injury during COVID, from overplaying Franz Liszt and Beethoven and Bach like way too much, and I had to get cortisone injections, which is scary because I had another kind of recent injury, and I thought that maybe I was going to have to get them again.
Yeah.
But when I got them back in, I guess it was 2021, I think is when I had that happened. I didn't have a chiropractor back then. Now I do, and I didn't even know the chiropractor can do your wrist. So he went and looked at it. He's like, "Oh, the whatever is out. Let me just dunk," and he did it, and
Oh,
it's been fine ever since. And I was like, man, I wish I had him because cortisone is straight acid. It eventually burns that stuff down, your bones and
yeah.
your joints. And
I
so
just
you
had one
you
in
get
my
it
knee
more than
last week.
oh wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
if you get it more than 3 or 4 times, eventually it wears down the area that's getting injected. Eventually it's worse for it than it is
Right.
good for. So
That's good to
having
know.
that chiropractor, and I recommend that to players out there. If you have an injury, don't do surgery, and before you get injections, which is probably like, injections should be your last resort, not surgery. And before you get to that last resort, go to a chiropractor, see if it's an area that they can fix.
Right.
They're probably not going to do your fingers, but they'll work on your wrists and the upper part of your hand. And if that's the issue, and it can be with a lot of people, then I would recommend that. Yeah, Bernie complained about his arthritis as long as I knew him. So he had
Yeah.
his arthritis at least since the late 90s, early 2000s. That's how long I
Wow.
knew him.
Yeah.
And so, it was something that plagued him for a long time. But I mean, I hate to say it because I'm in the same boat. The Bernie Worrell style, which I have also acquired, sort of had a parallel version of for many years, even before I knew him because of my classical training, requires quite a rigorous velocity, and it requires a lot in dynamics, but also a very heavy velocity and a very hard hitting hands and fingers, strong fingers, and it can wear you down. You do that for a lifetime. It can beat you up pretty bad. And I used to smoke cigarettes when I was younger. I smoked cigarettes for a long time, and then when I quit, I noticed that my hands and fingers felt better. So,
Oh, wow. Okay.
Bernie smoked cigarettes
Right. Yeah.
forever and a lot, and I think that was probably one of the biggest contributors to his arthritis, because that smoke and that tobacco and that nicotine and all that stuff is terrible for your joints. And it's all his joints. And I remember he'd wear those gloves, the fingerless gloves, try to rub them together and always working on them and trying to get them work, and I just always felt like, man, it's probably the cigarettes, and a big part of your health. I feel like I probably would have had a lot worse health problems than I do now, for as much stuff that has happened to me health-wise from living on the road and the hard life that goes with that. It'd be a lot worse if I still smoked and drank. I know that, or did hard drugs or anything like that.
You've got a high risk industry as far as like maintaining a healthy lifestyle and keeping your mind straight. And
and I think as a lot of it is what we put out, running and exercising, and what we put in, our food, what we eat. And on the road, it's hard to be healthy. It's really hard. I run on the treadmill. I try to eat right, but you end up eating late, and there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. And people don't think about a lot of that stuff, but that stuff wears you down over the decades and the eras. And the next thing you know, you turn around and you've lived an entire life, and you're completely worn down, and you're still doing it. I mean, that's the thing. He still played it at penultimate level, like at tip top shape, with all the pain and all the other stuff he was dealing with and thinking about. Man, I mean, just such an inspiring thing. But it also is a warning in a way. Tells me, look at pay attention to what you're doing. Try to be as cognizant as possible, because, he cared so much about the art. He just didn't let anything get in the way. And you should do that, but you should also keep a healthy purpose at the same time. And not to say that he wasn't, but we've learned from our elders. You know what I mean? They lived the messed up life so that the next generation can understand, how to make it work. Because none of it was something he did on purpose. It's just the rigors of a life like this. And again, they've taken their toll on me like they would on anybody, but you just try to maintain and just do as much as you can, and work as hard as you can, and keep an eye on yourself at the same time.
Yeah, Bernie, one thing, we definitely missed and love Bernie. He was always, we'll go see him at a gig and hang out with him backstage or whatever. He would always, we'd be talking to him, some young musician in the band would be coming by and he'd go, "Hey, Joe Kelley, he does a show in Fairfield, Connecticut on VOF." He'd push me to talk to the younger musician. He was always supporting, the ones that, like you said, the ones he was mentoring all these years. It was less about himself. Yeah. So
he was, I mean, I remember him saying to me, you're going to be the one taking my place. I'm like, "No, Bernie, we play together. We're both." He's like, "No." He's like, "I already have a plan. I'm going to leave. And eventually when you're ready, you're going to take my place." I was like, oh, okay. I didn't really get it, And then I remember we played a show in Paris where they used to give me a solo on Funkadelic. Gary would give me a solo. And then Bernie was so proud of me after this solo. He came up to the front of the stage. He's like, "My protege, Danny Bedrosian, he's going to be taking my place." And then it wasn't long after. Hold on 1 second. I'm sorry. It wasn't long after that he was like, "Okay, I'm leaving. I want you to take my position. You're going to be the, And again, I was already his auxiliary. I was already playing on the stage the whole show, but now I was in that position, and there's different responsibilities and what he had trained me to do. So yeah, it was really special. I have a very I still feel very close to that time and to him.
I got one final question. This might be an odd one, but you know, I mentioned the clips and your performances that you put on Facebook, and did you do a clip you mixed like a DeBarge song into one of your performances?
What was it? Say it again.
Did you mix like a little feel to El DeBarge song? In one of your,
Oh, I don't know. Do you
yeah,
remember
I
what
don't
video
know.
it was?
No, I got to go back. I'll let you know. I'll text you one day, because I remember I was like, it was really cool, and I was like, oh, he mixed like DeBarge in there, or maybe maybe DeBarge sampled that song and you mixed it in.
It's possible, and it might have just been coincidental, but I did work with El DeBarge quite a bit when he was doing the
Okay.
Gangsters of Love album with George, and then he was coming out on stage with us for a real brief period. But you know, worked with him in the studio, and he was a great guy, great singer, fantastic talent, a great keyboard player.
Yeah. I've seen some of his just playing the keyboard and singing stripped down.
Yeah.
So hey, listen, our viewers, our listeners, you got to pick up the authorized P-Funk song reference, the official canon of Parliament Funkadelic, the span of their entire history. Go to all your outlets to sell books. You know, you can get it the hard copy, you can get a Kindle. And Danny referenced the book he's working on about the special time in Parliament Funkadelic, 1975. You're going to be on the road. Some dates already set. GeorgeClinton.com, right?
Yep. George has some dates already for the beginning of February, and then also my group Secret Army, which is my trio with Benzel Cowan and Lige Curry. We're basically the bedrock of the rhythm section for P-Funk, and we go out and we're doing quite a bit of shows this year. You can go to my Facebook or my Instagram pages and see all the shows. We're doing the Southeast in February, March, and April. We're going back to the Northeast in June and September and December. So a lot of dates coming up. So
yeah,
look out for those.
Are great musicians, and you know, Live's great guy and everything. But you make him smile with Secret Army on stage.
Oh yeah, nice.
I noticed that. I was like, because he, you know, Elijah's kicking back, keeping the rhythm and everything, but you got him, you know. You got
we have fun
on stage. Yeah.
We have fun. We really stretch out and get to do all the things we don't always get to do, and just have a really good time. It's a lot of freedom and fun, but still very dedicated and disciplined. And yeah, we have a ball.
So, hey, Danny, thanks to spend so much time, and really interesting. I mean, talking with you, you know, you got a lot to let the viewership hear about behind the scenes and everything. And we're hope to see you right here in the upstate New York, if you guys hit up here.
Yeah, I'm going to be up that way in June, I think. We're doing something. I think we're doing something with ARP up that way. So yeah, I will let you know for sure.
Yeah, we definitely will be in the house. So best to you and your family. And we're going to talk in the near future. You got a lot more years. Let's go. You're going to be the exception to the keyboardist stretch of things. You're going to be one of the exceptions.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Joe. Same to you. Much love to you and your family. And thank you for having me on.